I'm Duncan McLeod, and this is Tech Central. I'm really looking forward to chatting to my next guest. He really needs no introduction to anyone who's been following the e-commerce space over the last 20 years here in South Africa. Andy Higgins is MD of uAfrica and the founder of Bidorbuy, and he's also helped launch PayFast with Jonathan Smith. And he knows a lot about what's happening and has happened in the e-commerce space in South Africa. Andy, it's great to chat to you. Finally, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure. Andy, before we start and before we chat about what you're up to now and your career history, I was having a look at your LinkedIn page, and I see that you're a former South African Navy diver. You were based at SAS Scorpion in Durban. That must have been really interesting. Tell us about it.
Sure, yeah. Not many people have asked me about that. It was quite a long time ago. I would say it's actually probably one of my proudest achievements of my life, being able to go through that process. Excuse me. I matriculated in 1992 in Durban, and it was just as all the changes were taking place in South Africa. So all my school colleagues knew that if they chose to go to university first, they wouldn't have to do their national service. But I actually decided, specifically because I had this dream of becoming a Navy diver, to do my national service. So I was part of this final intake for national service in South Africa, which was quite an interesting experience in itself, and found myself first of all in Saldanha Bay to do my basic training, and then I went through this selection process to be a Navy diver, which everyone said was near impossible because it was highly sought after and everyone wanted to do it, and only so many people got selected, and even fewer actually completed the course. So yeah, out of a few hundred people, wannabes in the beginning, I think about 30 of us got selected to go on the course, and I think, if I remember correctly, 11 of us passed at the end. So for me, I believe it set me up for life, because and having gone to boarding school myself as well, I felt that whole process was not very, personally, didn't like build you up as a person. Whereas I actually felt my experience in the military did that. And kind of when I left there, felt like you could conquer the world. If you put your mind to anything, it's more, well, that's a very physical process that actually you realize it's more a mental exercise than anything else. And if you set your mind to it, you can pretty much achieve most things.
Which school did you go to as a matter of interest?
DHS, Durban High School.
Durban High School, okay. I also went to school in Durban, Hillcrest High School.
Okay.
Oh, it looks like you fell off your chair there, Andy. Is that your iPad slipping on the desk? So it must have been quite a cool experience, interesting experience. Now, you say that you spent time diving in the Durban Harbour beneath ships there. What was that about?
So because Durban Harbour is an unprotected harbour, our main responsibility was to search the bottom of the strike craft, which were based in Durban Harbour, for any potential mines.
Okay.
So that's kind of what I did every day. Every morning as a routine, we had to go and bottom search those strike craft. And so you had to make sure you had good relations with the people on the ships, that they didn't use the heads, the toilets, while you were searching the aircraft.
Did that ever happen to you?
Once or twice, yes.
No. It must be pretty murky in that harbour.
Yeah, so what we ended up doing a lot of the time also was searches. People lost things in the harbour, or unfortunately, if someone drove a vehicle into the harbour or something like that, would get called out to do that. Sort of search and rescue type thing.
Yeah. Did you ever find anything interesting during those dives?
We found, you find all sorts of things in the mud there. Probably my most interesting experience was where we had a yacht had sunk, and we had to put airbags underneath it and lift it up. But my ultimate favorite was when we would do combined exercises with the Air Force, and then I got to jump out of helicopters, normally for training, but sometimes for real exercises as well. So yeah, it was quite a rush. I enjoyed those days.
Yeah. Did you ever think of doing that as a career?
So a lot of the guys who I did my training with, they would go on to do things like diamond mining in Namibia or work on the oil rigs. It certainly crossed my mind, but I ended up after that, well, after first going to study, and then I went and worked on super yachts in the Caribbean, which I mean, it sounds glamorous, and to some extent it was. But I think it was more fun than going to mine diamonds in Namibia or work on the oil rigs. So no, I think I'm pleased with my decision I made.
Wow. Okay. From diving to super yachts, it sounds like you've got the career of James Bond here.
It probably sounds better than it was, but
Right.
yeah, that was my dream. Within a few days of graduating from university, I flew over to the States, ended up walking the docks in Fort Lauderdale, and found myself a job on some of the yachts there in the Caribbean as a dive master, and actually I ended up being second engineer.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I was really qualified for that, even though I had a degree in electronic engineering. It's quite a different ball game when you find yourself in an engine room of a yacht that's taking water, or the diesel generator has stopped working. They don't exactly teach you that sort of thing in university.
Yeah. Now, this was a massive yacht. I mean, we're talking super yachts. Yeah. How big was this thing?
Yeah. So the main one I ended up on was a 175-foot yacht. There were 12 crew on board, and we took 10 guests. At the time, it was, I think, in the 10 biggest super yachts in the world. There's now much bigger ones, but yeah.
Sure. So can you say whose yacht it was?
It was a rich, wealthy Texan. It was I think he was in the oil industry.
All right.
His name was Mr. Parker. He wasn't that well known, but we had interesting guests. We'd have senators and they'd come on board. So it was quite interesting. He had, his children were about the same age as I was. So it was quite interesting when they would come on board and bring their friends, and they would they would want to go partying in Key West, or we would have to take them water sports and diving and all of that. It was life in the fast lane. It was, we worked really hard as well. So, we'd be up at 6 a.m. having to do our daily duties, and then they would want to take them out late into the night. Easily be up after midnight and then have to be up early the next morning. So it sounds glamorous and all that, but it was also a lot of hard work.
A lot of hard work, but you must have met some really interesting people.
Yeah, I guess it probably formulated my view on money and finances and wealth and all that I have today, where you meet these people that, in my view, are pretty average people, actually, nothing really special. I mean, and they had managed to accumulate significant wealth in their lives. So you say, well, why not? Anyone can really do that.
Cool, fascinating stuff. So when did you come back to South Africa?
I ended up, let's think, that was 97, 98. And then I found myself in London, and that was sort of at the beginning of the dot-com boom.
Yeah.
So I ended up 2 years in London, and I worked for an internet company there, which was supposed to be the answer to eBay in Europe. And I helped them launch. I was on the technical team, and I helped them launch sites across Europe and in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found myself, and then from there is when we launched Bidorbuy in 1999, and that's when I came back to South Africa.
Yeah,
but I didn't last long in South Africa. I was here for about a month or so, and because the shareholders, the investors that invested initially, they encouraged much bigger thinking, and we thought eBay was in North America. The company I'd worked for in the UK was focusing on Europe. It was called QXL. It now became Traders and then got bought by Naspers, and since it's been sold. So for me, there was a whole interesting history there.
Oh, wow.
The South African tied that.
Yeah.
But our shareholders and the investors then said, South Africa is a relatively small country. What about the rest of the world? There was Asia, there was Australia. And I found myself actually in September 99 arriving in Australia for the first time. And we set up office in Sydney, hired a bunch of people, ended up importing some South Africans from South Africa because I didn't really know any better. And that was back. It was back in the time when when they said any two guys with a business plan with .com in the business plan could raise $2 million. And we actually ended up raising in a short period of time $12 million and launched Bidorbuy from our base in Australia, first for South Africa, then India actually, then Australia. And we ended up either launching or about to launch in 12 countries around the world when the .com crash happened when was that? Sort of March 2000 when that started to decline.
Yes.
So yeah, that was quite a roller coaster ride as well.
It must have been. I mean, 1999. It was the markets were crazy. The Nasdaq was flying. Companies like Pets.com were worth billions of dollars, and you were launching a commerce platform, online commerce platform in the form of Bidorbuy. When that crash happened, you were still very much in the startup phases of your business. I mean, what went through your mind as the market started to fall apart in the early part of 2000?
Yeah, I think when you look back on it in history, you see that it's very clear. Obviously, from the graphs, you see the peak, but I think at the time it wasn't nearly as sudden as that. You didn't really know what was going on. It was obviously a lot of turmoil and uncertainty, and at the time it didn't feel like this distinct point in history that we now call the dot-com crash. But I think for myself, it had been a crazy time. We had been working. We weren't like some of the dot-coms you would have read about that were very lavish and, flying first class around the world, sipping champagne. We weren't like that, although we were spending a lot of money and we didn't have income. So we were still sort of on this land grab and build it and they will come kind of mentality. But we didn't charge for our service, which clearly was a mistake in retrospect. But we weren't super extravagant, but we worked crazy hours, And so for me, it was actually quite a relief when I got told that we were having to close down the business, which ultimately didn't happen. But I remember at the time getting a call from my chairman and saying, we can't carry on. And I had, for me, it had been relatively little risk. I hadn't invested money personally in the business. I had actually, because I'd also really just worked, I'd got paid a decent salary. I'd actually saved up a lot of cash. And I was really looking forward to just taking a few months off and going traveling and then figuring out what next. But it had been, I'd learned so much. I felt I'd gained a lifetime's worth of experience in a few months even. So I was very relieved. But as it turns out, we didn't close down the business. We ended up selling our business in Australia to eBay. Therefore, it was effectively a loss. We closed down all the other businesses except for South Africa. India, we ended up merging with a former competitor there, which ultimately got bought by eBay, that business, and was a success for our shareholders ultimately. And we packed up shop in Australia. I ended up coming back to South Africa. We retrenched. We went from employing hundreds of people around the world to, at our worst, it was myself and part-time and one other. That's when I decided to do an MBA. That's what apparently the trend that happens during these downturns. Universities have this huge influx of people wanting to study. So yeah, so it was, that's how I ended up back in South Africa. That's the sort of period 2001 to 2004, which I refer to as the dark ages of internet in South Africa.
Yeah.
It was still when, ADSL used to let you dial into, it wasn't mainstream, you had to dial in to, it's crazy to think.
Those were dark days indeed, yes.
Yeah. And I remember, I can't remember exactly when it was, but I think it was somewhere around 2005. I was sitting, being a little bit of the geek that I am, I was watching the web server log files of Bidorbuy, which, was kind of just in maintenance mode at that stage. I think I went sometimes weeks without even looking at the website, but trade was still happening on it, but very limited. And I'd see these, you could still see, they've restricted it a bit nowadays, but you could see clearly the referrers and the log files, so where people are coming from when they get to your website. You would see I was seeing a lot of traffic coming from Google, so you could see exactly what people were searching for. And because there wasn't a lot of content on the web at the time, we were getting like an unfair share of the Google traffic because we had, still thousands of products on the website. So people searching, because there wasn't a lot of competition from a content point of view, people searching buy iPod or buy whatever they were searching for, we invariably would, and we'd done a reasonably good job, I guess, with this on-site optimization for SEO, which not many people knew about back in the day. And there were some tricks you could do to sort of, hopefully not cheat the system, but to get an advantage.
Sure.
And like within a period of around that period, just sort of, although we're spending zero on advertising, we started getting a lot of this traffic, and the website started to grow organically on its own, really. It was kind of just, it was in this sort of set and forget mode in a way, in a maintenance mode. And it started growing. And so now I really have this sort of love-hate relationship with Google, where I think to some extent, maybe we wouldn't have survived that period if it wasn't for Google, because we got all this free traffic.
Yeah.
But then in other ways, sometimes can be quite frustrating. Not nowadays, certainly with all the competition and having to pay Google for your brand terms and things like that can be frustrating.
Yeah, yeah. You're still on the board of Bidorbuy as a non-exec, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So take us through how the business has evolved since those heady .com days and the crash and then the slow emergence after that of e-commerce as a viable platform. How has Bidorbui's business changed through that period?
Yeah, so certainly in recent, I guess in the last decade or so, there's been significant competition. We started seeing an interest from international investors around 2007, which was also where we were actually profitable back in 2007 off a small sort of base of operations. And so there was limited competition then. So we saw very good growth back then. And having also been exposed to some of the other similar marketplace businesses around the world, for me, I'd always hoped that in South Africa, we would have a similar experience to what they experienced in these other markets, which was at some point they experienced some kind of exponential growth. So to take a term from Malcolm Gladwell, he talks about the tipping point, or other texts talk about the knee of the curve. You get this sort of inflection point at some point where it starts to grow exponentially. And I was always hopeful that at some point we would see that in South Africa. But in my experience, we never did. So in many other countries like Poland and in Australia, even the UK even experienced this. They got this sort of massive uptick at some point. And then, as far as I can tell, in South Africa, we've always had reasonably good sort of linear growth, although off a very small base. So we've seen between 20 and 40% growth in e-commerce over the years. And Bidorbuy has managed to sort of maintain that largely over the time. But at the same time, we decided to take a more aggressive approach, towards the beginning of the last decade and invest further in the business. But at the same time, obviously with the likes of other online retailers coming on board, obviously Takealot and others, we saw a massive increase in competition, and we weren't able to grow at the rate that we would like. I think, to be honest, we probably also became a bit complacent and didn't sort of grow with the times. We're now working very hard on improving, in particular, which is very passionate for me, given what I'm doing now, is around the logistics space. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have, and I think this is really where in e-commerce it's won and lost, is to be able to provide a solid logistics platform, so your merchants know exactly where, a standardized rate of what you're going to pay for delivery, and you know exactly when you're going to get it, which Bidorbuy has a lot of work to do currently. So we've kind of had this sort of linear growth along the way, but we haven't had any major breakthroughs yet. So it's been tough. The roller coaster continues. I think the business is, in my view, it's been more than 20 years, right? So 1999 when we started.
Yeah.
So in some ways, it's frustrating that we're not further along than we could be or should be at this stage. So we have some work cut out to fix things and to get us back on the track that we want to be. But it's still a viable business. We employ, I think it's 80 people now, and yeah, I think it's still got a lot of place where it's, in my opinion, is also different to some of the other retailers. Is we've got a thriving community of people that trade collectibles and art, so things like coin collection and stamp collection and antiques and collectibles and that sort of thing. There's not really any other platforms in South Africa that I'm aware of locally that have that sort of thriving community that Bidorbuy has.
Yeah, yeah. How do you see the platform changing over the coming years to adapt to the changing market conditions?
Yeah, I think people. So first of all, there's been a major shift. Whereas when we started, I mean, we called the Bidorbuy. We actually started with auctions only. If you look at the history of like eBay, for example, there's already a distinct shift where people move from auctions, although auctions can lend themselves well to where you don't know the price of it for collectibles and things like that as well. So I think people want instant gratification. So it's definitely a strong move away from the auction mechanism to fixed price or buy now. So people want to be able to know right now that they want to purchase this product, it's going to cost X, the shipping is going to cost them so much, and they're going to get it in 2 days or however long it's going to take. So we need to move more towards a more standard fixed price platform from that point of view, where we're able to provide certainty and a unified experience across all sellers to that base. So right now it's still a bit haphazard, where different sellers, different merchants on the platform will use different methods for payment and in particular for shipping. And that's really consumers, excuse me, they want more certainty and not have to, and have that standardized experience. So
you see
that's how
you see it becoming more of an online shopping, the traditional online shopping site rather than an auction site.
For sure, it really is moving in that direction, and I think it's going to move more and more that way.
Yeah.
So I mean, we obviously can see what's happened with Amazon and eBay in the US, and I think it's in many ways we're going to follow a similar path.
What's happened to eBay? I used to hear about eBay all the time, but I hardly ever hear the company's name anymore. Are they still doing well?
I guess, well, you could, well, if you look at their market caps, I haven't looked recently, but with excuse me, with Amazon approaching, 1 trillion market cap, or is it over that now?
Over $1 trillion, yeah.
Yeah, eBay's market cap is, I think, about $25 billion only. It's under $30 billion currently.
Yeah.
So that just shows you, I mean, for me, what's interesting there as well, excuse me, if you take a company like Shopify, for example, which now has a market cap of about $60 billion, it's more than double that of eBay.
Yes.
So it's eBay definitely has lost some of its, well, a lot of its significance, but they are continually trying to reinvent themselves, and they definitely still have a place there, I believe.
Yeah. Now, Andy, you're MD of a business called uAfrica.com. I believe that was formerly Jump Shopping. What does that company do? Take us through what you're involved with these days.
Okay, so Bidorbuy, my history with Bidorbuy was obviously around an online marketplace. In 2007, I got involved with PayFast, which is online payments, got to understand that side of it. And I think it became evident, we also, as part of the early days, we were involved with launching, we partnered with Shopify in South Africa and helped them launch locally. We originally thought of building our own sort of cloud-based e-commerce platform, and then ended up rather partnering with Shopify on that. But throughout that whole process, we realized the one area that was lacking still in e-commerce was the logistics side. And it's probably the least sexy of the whole e-commerce sector. But in my opinion now, I believe it's probably the most important. And it also turns out to be technically very interesting, because it opens up all sorts of challenges around technology and ways that you can improve it. So it wasn't a straight line how we got here, but ultimately at uAfrica, we focused on solving the logistic challenge in e-commerce. And the way we've done that so far is, and again, we see ourselves as a technology company. We're not interested in owning infrastructure, and we don't want to, own warehouses and trucks and deal with drivers and all of that. So what we've done is we see ourselves kind of as the glue between on the one hand, the e-commerce platforms, and the other side, the logistics industry. So we've partnered with a number of courier companies, and we provide a platform that makes it easy when someone receives an order online, that you can get quotes from multiple courier companies, and either through automated rules and tools that we've got in place, or very easily through a few clicks, you can select a particular courier, generate an electronic waybill, and our system then takes care of the entire process of communicating with the courier companies and communicating with the merchants' buyers, keeping them up to date throughout the whole process. A lot of our research has also shown that although there's a lot of talk about same-day delivery and how fast delivery is, what we found is that consumers really just want good communication. And as long as they know upfront what they're in for, and they communicate it with, and if there's a problem, that they get told, and even if it's going to take 3 days for something to be delivered, they just want to know that and be kept up to date throughout the whole process.
Yeah.
So our system makes it easy for merchants to be able to do that. And we think it's a win-win. Through the volumes, we have, over 1,000 merchants using our platform. So we're able to negotiate good rates with the courier companies, and we're able to pass some of that on to especially the smaller merchants, and at the same time provide them with tools to make enable them to provide a better service to their customers.
I know there's been a bit of controversy lately around the South African Post Office and what courier companies are allowed to carry in terms of regulations. I must admit, I haven't followed it very closely. Maybe, do you mind if you've got some insight there, just to take us through what some of those issues are?
Yeah, sure. So apparently it's not a new thing at all. Excuse me, sorry. It's been around since way back when in the South African law, that only the post office is allowed to transport a parcel of, I think it's below 2 kilograms, or it might be 1 kilogram. So it's entrenched in the law as I guess, to protect the business of the post office, that only they are entitled to, by law, are allowed to transport domestically a parcel below, say, 2 kilograms. Now, it's reared its head recently. There's been a lot of press about it, but it's not new. It's been around I think for decades, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
And my understanding is where the courier companies forever have got around this is in the logistics industry. When you talk about weight, it's one of two things. It's either the actual weight. So if you put something on a scale and weigh it, it's that weight that comes up, or it's the greater of that, or what we'd call the volumetric weight. And there's different formulas that are used to calculate, but the most common one would be you'll take the length times the width times the height of the parcel in centimeters and multiply those together, and then divide by a factor of something like 4,000. And then you end up with a weight in kilograms. And so that's why you'll see most of the courier companies, they use a standard sleeve which has a volumetric mass of greater than 2 kilograms. So they're not actually breaking the law. If you put a letter inside the sleeve and you transport that, that's still actually theoretically or by law, you can argue that is a 2 kilogram parcel, even though it physically doesn't maybe weigh 2 kilograms. So I actually think it's a big fuss about nothing, because unless they went, I mean, I think it's a silly law, first of all, because,
of course.
But I actually don't think it's going to have a major impact, or it hasn't yet, because of that very minor loophole that's been used, ever since it's been in place, as far as I'm aware.
And there's no talk of changing the regulations of the law to make it more explicit?
Not that I've heard of.
Okay.
I can't see that happening. Otherwise, I think what people will probably end up doing is adding some sand in their parcel to make it 2 kg, which would be absolutely ridiculous as well, because it seems a silly rule.
Yeah, no, totally. So you've launched a product or a business, correct me which it is, called ShipLogic. Is that the platform on which this logistics business you've built is based? So is it a new product that you've launched?
It's actually a new product. So what we found was, so as we integrated with all the courier companies that we've done so in South Africa, our technology team, being technology people, got very frustrated with the tools that were available. Most of these systems are built, some of them are even from 20 years ago, and they haven't really kept up with the times. So when I'm explaining to sort of in layman's terms what we do, is a lot of the software that's out there currently uses what I'd call pre-Uber tech. So when you talk about shipping something, fundamental to it is a location. And most of these systems would define a location either based on an area. So they'll say arbitrarily decide a suburb is Bryanston, and they define that as an area, and it's not well defined. Or they may use postal codes, which are even worse, because postal code, for example, for the township for Alexandra and for Wynberg are the same postal code, and they're two very different geographies to have to deliver something into. So clearly it was very obvious to us early on that the modern way, the better way of doing this is every address needs to be geocoded into a latitude and longitude, which is the way it would work. Way it works if you're using something like an Uber app or something similar.
Yeah.
So we decided internally to create our own team to build essentially software for courier companies to use to run their business, based on this concept of geocoding and geofencing areas. So now you would go onto a map, the courier company would go onto a map, and they would draw a geofence for a particular area and they can define that for their rates or for drivers' designated areas or for their area that covers the hub. And then the key for us is to make sure that every address that comes into our system, that we're able to geocode it to a latitude and longitude. And once we're able to do that, then the technology becomes a lot more powerful. We can do things like auto-assign. Many of the courier companies currently have to have a human being that will assign a driver with a particular collection, for example. So our system can obviously automatically do that now, as long as the correct geofences have been set up and we have the correct latitude and longitude. If you need to charge a surcharge for an embassy, for example, we'll draw a small geofence around the embassy so that if the address geocodes into that area, it adds a surcharge on top of it. Or if it's a shopping center or whatever the case is, we can go very granular. We can in fact go down to street level where we can say one side of the street is assigned to a particular driver and the other side of the street is assigned to another driver, for example. So we've actually spent 2 years so far, just a little over 2 years, building that tech. And it's been quite a mammoth task, actually much bigger than when we took it on, but we're quite excited about it. And we built it more for what we could consider more, the modern world with using modern technology rather than having to have this vague definition of what an area is.
So how does that work? Do the courier companies and other players in the logistics space purchase that software from you? Is it a software as a service type model?
No, so we've gone definitely software as a service. So it's all cloud-based. So a lot of the courier companies would operate also with software installed at their premises inside their hubs as well. So that's also quite a shift to try and move away from that. But certainly going for the software as a service cloud-based solution where we would host everything in the cloud on their behalf and allow it to scale as needed, allow them, if they need to deploy a new hub, make it very easy for them, or if they have kiosks or mobile hubs that they can easily deploy without having to. And the other thing we've done is also to make it, from a driver point of view, to work on the most basic Android apps, Android phones. So, even a R1,000 phone potentially can be used from a driver point of view, whereas currently many high-end devices are having to be used from that point of view.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Andy, before I let you go, I think let's touch on COVID-19 since we're all sitting in lockdown at the moment. E-commerce companies, like everyone else, is prohibited right now from selling non-essential items. But as we emerge from the lockdown, and it'll probably be a slow emergence from the lockdown, based on everything I've seen, and I suspect people will still be cautious about going out in public and in large events and going to the supermarket unnecessarily, etc. Do you think that as we emerge from this lockdown that e-commerce in South Africa is going to get a significant boost as a result?
Sure. I hope so. Like I said, I was hoping for this sort of exponential growth over the last 2 decades, which hasn't happened. I've sort of resigned to the fact that I'm content with, still, we can't complain if we're growing at, say, 30% per year. Any other sector, especially retail, would love to have those sort of numbers. So I do think, though, that this could be a positive catalyst for e-commerce. We're now sitting at just over, what I think the best estimate is 1.4% or just over 1% of total retail is online in South Africa, compared to well over 10% for many other markets.
Yeah.
So I think we do have catch up to play. And I think that this could help us get there. But I think still, if we still only going to grow as an industry at 30% per year, and that continues to be linear growth, I think we'll still take it. Many other sectors are going to have negative growth.
30% growth in this economic environment is outstanding, in fact.
Exactly. So, in fact, if you take uAfrica, even, for example, we're growing at more than 100% per year off a decent base now. So we will be shipping now close to 50,000, facilitating 50,000 shipments per month. This time last year, we would have been doing less than 25,000 per month.
Yeah.
So the growth is definitely there. I think that this this will change, have a fundamental shift. I know it's my wife, for example, she's going to be ordering a lot more online, not that she didn't order online before. I think the question still is whether it will get to sort of the mass population. Yeah, so I think it remains to be seen. I personally think it might just take some time. So in the medium to long term, I'm very bullish. Yeah, I don't know in the short term. Well, in the short term now, our numbers are down. We're depending on what platform I look at, we're trading at somewhere between 75 to as low as 15% of what we would have done in the same period last year. So I think there'll probably also be a fair amount of pent-up demand. So when things start to open up, which I agree with you, I think it'll be gradual. I don't think there will be this, even come end of next week, end of the month. I don't think it's all of a sudden, it's not binary, it's not lockdown is on and then it's off. I think it's going to be this gradual thing. I think we will see an increase. I guess I'm just maybe a bit older now and wiser to just say, yes, it's going to be this massive boost, because in the past, I've certainly been wrong about that. But yeah, I'm hopeful.
Hopeful. Good stuff. Well, Andy, before I let you go, the final thing I wanted to ask you is we had Kim Reid, the CEO of Takealot, on the show about a week ago. And he made an impassioned plea to government to allow unfettered e-commerce to take place even before the end of the current lockdown, arguing that it's a safe way of transacting and getting the economy going again. Would you support that view? Would you like to see unfettered e-commerce taking place during the lockdown?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think you can take it a little bit further than that, though, because my view, I'm also trying to read a little bit between the lines from government's perspective. I mean, I think that they have the initial response to this epidemic, this crisis was phenomenal. I was really proud to be South African, especially when looking at what's going on in some of the other so-called first world countries. But I do think we've got to a point now where we need to look at options like that. I do think e-commerce could potentially be seen as a bit of an elitist area in South Africa. So, whereas the main thrust, and as it should be, is to save lives. Some guy sitting in Bryanston doesn't get some luxury item that he could order online. I don't think that's obviously a priority for government, and it shouldn't be. So I do think I would broaden that argument a bit more, and I say, yes, the priority should be to restrict the spread of the virus and to protect human lives. But definitely a way you can do that is well, the main blunt tool we have, obviously, is to reduce human contact. And the way you can do that is to use delivery services, which are very well geared to this. The courier companies have really come to the party. They've trained their drivers. They're wearing masks. They've got hand sanitizers. They're doing contactless delivery. And I think that doesn't only have to apply to e-commerce. It can apply to all retail in the country. So I think it's about opening up the logistics industry domestically to allow anyone to ship anything, anywhere, and to adhere to good standards to make sure that we prevent the spread of the virus. So yeah, so obviously e-commerce would benefit from that, but I think it doesn't only have to be e-commerce, it can be the broader retail sector. Even if I'm just some small store, why not allow them to trade and either have people pick up or have a courier company come and collect from them and deliver. Yeah.
Good arguments. Andy Higgins is MD of uAfrica.com and founder of Bidorbuy. Thanks so much for a fascinating discussion, and all the best with the rest of this lockdown.
Thank you, Duncan. Same to you.